She had spent years building a quiet, happy life, believing her past heartbreak was safely behind her. But as she stood in the crowded church, waiting for her sister to walk down the aisle, the world seemed to tilt. When the groom turned to face the guests, her blood ran cold. He was staring right at her, and in that instant, every truth she had buried came rushing back, threatening to shatter everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. Hello, my friends. I am Olivia, and this is Olivia's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I had always imagined my sister's wedding as one of those perfect cinematic moments, golden sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, the faint scent of roses and lilies drifting on the warm spring air, and the soft murmur of friends and family greeting each other. I arrived early, clutching my purse nervously because despite the cheerful chaos, I had a small, persistent worry in the back of my mind. Would I be able to smile through it all without thinking of what I had lost? Life, I had learned, was cruelly ironic. 3 years ago, I had left a marriage that had slowly turned hollow, believing I was doing the right thing by stepping away from someone I had once loved more than my own heartbeat. I told myself I needed peace, clarity, and time to rebuild a life that was truly mine. Some days, I succeeded. Other days, grief and nostalgia came crashing back without warning. Today, as I smoothed the folds of my dress in the pew, I felt that old, familiar ache simmer beneath my skin, as if it had been quietly waiting for this exact moment. The church was beginning to fill, and the soft chatter of relatives and friends created a gentle hum around me. The organist began a tentative prelude, the keys pressing out delicate notes that made the wooden pews vibrate beneath me. I could feel the weight of everyone's expectation, the shared anticipation, as though the air itself held its breath for the moment the bride would step into the aisle. I smiled because I loved my sister fiercely, and I wanted her happiness to be untainted by my inner turmoil. I had arranged myself as unobtrusively as possible, keeping my distance from familiar faces who might ask awkward questions. But then I noticed a few people turning subtly, whispering, pointing just slightly in the direction of the entrance. My heart skipped, but I forced a calm, casual expression. Weddings were supposed to be joyous, weren't they? And yet, something about the tension in the room made my skin prickle. Finally, the doors opened, and the bridesmaids glided down the aisle. Their dresses shimmered softly under the morning light, pastel hues reflecting the delicate glow of the chandeliers. I could feel my pulse quicken, caught between relief and apprehension. And then the moment arrived. The groom appeared, waiting at the altar, his posture perfect, his expression calm. My eyes, drawn almost involuntarily, locked onto him. Time slowed. My breath hitched. My stomach churned as a frozen realization began to seep through my veins. That wasn't just any groom. That wasn't just a stranger. My husband. My heart froze mid-beat. My body locked in a state of disbelief. The world around me seemed to blur into a haze of light and color, the whispers of the guests fading into distant echoes. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, everything I had carefully built, my life, my resolve, my peace, felt like fragile glass teetering on the edge of a cliff. And then he smiled. The smile on his face felt like a blade against my chest. I wanted to look away, to tell myself it couldn't possibly be him, that my mind was playing tricks, but my eyes refused to obey. Every detail was the same, the familiar tilt of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the way his hand rested lightly on the edge of the podium. It was him, my husband, The man I had left behind, the man I thought I had finally escaped. Panic bubbled up, cold and sharp, as my mind raced for explanations. How could he possibly be here? Weddings didn't mix with exes, did they? Was this some cruel joke? My throat tightened, and I felt the faint sting of tears threatening to break free. But even more confusing than the fear was the sudden, dizzying surge of longing, the part of me that had never fully let go, that had quietly hoped for something, anything to explain the hollow absence I had felt these past 3 years. I wanted to move, to run, to disappear into the back of the church, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by disbelief. The organs swelled behind me, a crescendo that mirrored the frantic beat of my heart. And then a whisper of recognition crossed his eyes. He knew me, not as some stranger in the crowd, not as an acquaintance from a life I had long abandoned, but as the woman he had once vowed to love. And for a fleeting second, it was as though the years collapsed, the space between us vanished, and we were the same people we had been before life's cruel twists had pulled us apart. I noticed the subtle details, the way his suit was impeccably tailored, the hint of a ring on his hand that wasn't meant for me, the calm authority in the way he stood. Everything about him screamed control, success, and a life meticulously built, so unlike the man I had left behind, whom I remembered as quiet, uncertain, and struggling. Questions churned in my head like storm-tossed waves. Who was he now? Why was he here? And most importantly, why had I never been told? My sister's laughter floated from the entrance as she adjusted her veil, unaware of the seismic shift happening just a few feet away. The officiant cleared his throat, glancing at the groom, whose composure never wavered, even as our eyes locked in a silent, unbearable recognition. My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, to demand answers in front of everyone, but the fear of shattering my sister's perfect day held my tongue hostage. Then came the moment that made my knees nearly buckle. The groom, my husband, began to speak, not yet to my sister, but to the room at large, as if he were acknowledging everyone's presence, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might never notice me, that perhaps I was merely a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was no longer his. But then his gaze shifted, lingering on me just long enough to make my skin prickle and my heart clench. It was a look filled with something I couldn't name. Regret, recognition, maybe even a desperate apology that words could never carry. I had to remind myself to breathe. Each inhale felt like dragging air through a tunnel of dread, each exhale trembling with the weight of a secret I had never expected to confront. And then, as my sister began to step forward, the groom, my husband, took a single step toward the altar, a step that shouldn't have been possible, a step that brought him into my peripheral vision, closer than anyone had a right to be. And in that heartbeat, as the world seemed to stop and the guests held their collective breath, he turned his head ever so slightly, just enough that our eyes met fully, unflinching. And in that split second, I understood something terrifying. He had seen me. He knew I was here. And whatever he had come to this wedding for, it wasn't just to witness my sister's happiness. The organ faded into a soft hum, but I barely noticed. My entire world had narrowed to the man standing at the altar, my husband, who had somehow infiltrated my sister's wedding with a calmness I couldn't fathom. My mind spun in circles, desperately trying to find a reason that made sense. Did he know about the wedding? Had he planned this? And if so, why? I felt my pulse hammering in my ears as fragments of memory collided with the present. I remembered the long nights we had spent together, the whispered promises, the quiet understanding between us. I remembered the day I walked away, believing that love alone couldn't mend the cracks in our lives. And now, here he was, a figure of composure and quiet authority, staring at me as if he had never stopped waiting for this moment. My chest tightened. It was suffocating, yet it awakened something inside me I thought had died with our marriage. He shifted slightly, and I caught the subtle details, the expensive watch glinting on his wrist, the tailored suit that fit him perfectly, the air of someone who had carved a life far beyond what I had known. He looked untouchable, as if the world had shaped him into someone I could never reach again. And yet, the eyes, those eyes still held that spark, that recognition of the woman he had once loved, the one he had let go of without fully saying goodbye. My sister appeared beside him, radiant and oblivious, smiling nervously at the congregation as if nothing unusual were happening. And in that moment, I realized the cruelest part of this entire situation. She had no idea. She had no idea that her groom was the man who had been my world, the one I had loved and lost. The thought twisted my stomach, but it also ignited a strange, fierce protectiveness. I couldn't ruin her day, but I couldn't ignore this either. A sudden movement caught everyone's attention. He stepped forward, just a little, his gaze never leaving mine. Something in his demeanor shifted, subtle but undeniable. He wasn't here just to witness, he was here to communicate, to convey something that words alone might fail to capture. And in that second, the air between us crackled with unspoken truths, regret, longing, fear, and perhaps an impossible hope. I felt my hands tremble at my sides. My heart raced so fast I feared it might betray me to the room full of strangers. I wanted to speak, to ask him why, to demand the answers I had spent years wishing I didn't need. But the words lodged in my throat, stuck in a web of fear and disbelief. What could he possibly say that would make any of this right? How could he explain the years, the silence, the absence? Then it happened. My husband reached out just slightly, his hand brushing against the podium in a gesture so subtle yet so deliberate that I understood immediately. He was trying to tell me something, to reach me without alarming anyone else. A message carefully encoded in movement designed for my eyes alone. My breath caught. My body leaned forward ever so slightly, instinctively trying to catch the meaning in that tiny motion. And in that suspended moment, as my sister took her first step toward the altar, my world shattered entirely. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't stumbled into the wedding by chance. He had planned this. Every detail, every movement, every look had been orchestrated. And now, as he turned his face slowly toward me, just enough that our eyes locked fully, I saw it. The truth. A truth that would change everything I thought I knew about him, about us, and about the life I had painstakingly rebuilt after losing him. The world around me seemed to collapse into silence. Every soft murmur, every shuffle of feet, every rustle of fabric faded into nothingness as our eyes locked. My husband, my once lost love, stood there at the altar, calm, composed, yet carrying a weight I could feel pressing through the distance between us. And then he moved again, just slightly, and the truth hit me like a lightning strike. He hadn't come here to steal my sister's happiness. He had come here to protect it. It all clicked. The careful gestures, the timing, the impossibly precise manner in which he had appeared. He had spent years quietly building a life that none of us could see, a life that allowed him to be here today without exposing the secrets that might have torn my sister's joy apart. The realization made my chest ache, a mixture of relief and heartbreak that left me trembling in the pew. He wasn't here to hurt me. He was here because he had to. Because he had always carried a burden that I hadn't known existed. Suddenly, the officiant's voice called for attention, reminding everyone that the ceremony was about to begin. My sister's hand gripped her bouquet, her smile radiant, innocent, completely unaware of the storm swirling around her. And I realized that for the first time in years, I understood the depth of his sacrifice. The man I had once thought abandoned me had spent years protecting not just me, but the life we had all lived separately, ensuring that no one, especially my sister, would be hurt by what had once been ours. The tears came then, silently, as I watched him glance at me one last time before turning his attention fully to the ceremony. That single look carried decades of unspoken words, regret, love, apology, and an undeniable devotion that had never faltered, even when I had believed it had. My heart, which had been frozen, began to thaw, and I felt a strange, bittersweet peace settle over me. The man I had loved, the man I had walked away from, was still here, silent, protective, steadfast. And though our lives had diverged, his actions spoke louder than any confession ever could. The ceremony began, and I allowed myself to focus on my sister, on the joy she radiated as she approached the altar. The organs swelled, the guests held their collective breath, and the world returned to its normal rhythm. Yet, through it all, I felt a quiet connection with him, a bond that neither distance nor time could sever. He had been my husband, my heart, my secret, and even now he remained that, a silent guardian of love, integrity, and sacrifice. As the vows were exchanged, I caught one final glimpse of him. His expression was serene, almost mournful, but filled with a quiet pride. He had chosen this path, made this sacrifice, and in doing so had shown me a love deeper than I had ever known. My heart ached with longing and gratitude all at once. The life I had rebuilt wasn't meaningless. It had prepared me to witness this moment, to understand the magnitude of what had been done in silence. And in that moment, as the bride and groom shared their first kiss, I whispered into the empty air beside me words I hadn't said in years. I see you. I always did. The truth was finally laid bare. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't abandonment. It was love, quiet, unwavering, and noble. And even though our paths had diverged, I understood, finally, that some love stories aren't about possession or proximity. They're about sacrifice, about choosing what's right, even when it shatters your own heart. And in that realization, my heart found a fragile, beautiful peace.